20,000 people get fed. What do you think that did to cautious and practical Philip? I think it stretched him a lot. And what we find in the life of Philip is that Philip was cautious and Philip was very practical. And yet, in that cautious and practical nature, while Peter and James and John especially were loud and boisterous and outgoing and impetuous, Philip was reserved and cautious. He kind of stayed back a little bit. And yet, in this passage, Jesus finds him and he calls him, and cautious and practical Philip becomes convinced. Look at what he says when he speaks to Nathanael. He says, "We have found him whom Moses in the law and the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." In other words, Philip comes to the conclusion in his cautious and practical nature that Jesus is the Messiah. That tells us something. In the life of Philip and in the life of Nathanael, they must have been studying the Word of God. How would they know the Messiah if they were practical, if they were cautious? They weren't the kind of person who'd show up and have an emotional experience. They had to see it. They had to think about it. Any of you like that? More of, hey, show me the facts. Show me the evidence. While some people experience God in an emotional way, others experience Him like Philip and Nathanael in a more cerebral and contemplative and cautious way. It takes them a while to make that decision. Turn to chapter 6. Here is the feeding of the 5,000. In chapter 6, beginning with verse 5, look at what it says. "Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing the large crowd, he turns to Philip." Why does he turn to Philip? He's practical, right? I mean, if you want somebody to help you with a decision, and especially if it has to do with sums, you need somebody practical. He turns to Philip and he says, "Where are we going to buy bread so that all of these," now what's he talking about? 5,000 men, the possibility that many of them have wives with them, and many of them have families, maybe even servants who have come to see this Jesus Messiah. Most scholars estimate they're going to have to feed 20,000 people. That's a lot of people, right? Do you want to be in charge of the stadium when it has 20,000 people and Jesus turns to you and says, "Hey, where are we going to get enough food to feed these people?" That was Philip. He's practical. So Philip immediately does what any cautious, practical person does. He pulls out his cell phone and he goes to the calculator and he calculates what it's going to take to feed all those people. Now, if you're new, he didn't really have a cell phone, okay? But he starts figuring it up, and he turns to Jesus and said, 200 denarii. That is the equivalent. A denarii would have been the equivalent of the average person's wage for a day. So it will take about 8 to 10 months of salary in order to feed these people, and that's if we can even find it. And Philip says, for everyone, even to get a bite of food. Well, Philip is cautious and practical, but Andrew, remember Andrew? The facts don't really matter. We got a little boy here, he's got a sack lunch. Hey, 5 loaves and 2 fish. I'm not sure it's enough, but Jesus says, has everybody sit down? And you know the rest of the story, right? Jesus takes 1 sack lunch, he prays over it, so that everybody, 20,000 people get fed. What do you think that did to cautious and practical Philip? I think it stretched him a lot, don't you? I mean, he's like, Jesus, it's going to take a year's salary to do this, and that's for everybody to get a bite. And Jesus takes one sack lunch, and it stretched him. If you are that cautious and calculating, practical Philip, you know what Jesus wants to do? He wants to stretch you and increase your faith. Well, go to chapter 12. Here's the third picture of Philip, and we find it in verse 20. Now there were some Greeks who had come to the feast in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And these came to Philip, probably because they thought, hey, Philip, that's a good Greek name. It not only means lover of horses, it was the father's name of Alexander the Great. I mean, it was a Greek name. And so they probably came to Philip. Philip is cautious, and they say to him, we would see Jesus. Philip is not sure what he should do. Cautious, practical, contemplative, but at least he has enough faith to turn to Andrew, and he says, Andrew, what do you think we should do? That's a great thing, isn't it? Because God uses a cautious, practical person alongside of a person of faith and outgoing and forward moving, and he brings them together, and together they bring the Greeks to Jesus. Look at one more, and we'll see Philip. He's still learning. He's still being stretched by God. In chapter 14, beginning with verse 7, Jesus is teaching the disciples, if you had known me, you would have known my Father. From now on, you know him and have seen him. Philip, the cautious practical, says, Lord, show us the Father. Anybody see a problem? What did Jesus just say? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Have you ever asked a dumb question? Any of y'all? Yeah, I have. And so Philip was the same way, practical, cautious. Show us the Father, and it will be enough. What a great statement until you think about, oh, Philip. Now look at Jesus. Jesus turns to Philip. Have I been with you so long, and you do not know me? Wow. It is possible that we could be so cautious, so practical, so careful that we actually miss the most important thing. We could put all of that into a lack of faith. If there's one thing we learn about Philip, he was cautious, he was practical, and God uses cautious and practical people. But two things have to happen. They have to have faith, and they have to be stretched if God is going to use them.